The following is a case study on the crash of November 452 Delta Alpha. November 452 Delta Alpha had a planned 80 nautical mile flight from Philadelphia International to Teterboro Airport. The flight was set to last around 25 minutes and was the third like it of the day. The crew consisted of William Ramsey, who was the captain of the flight, and Jeffrey Alino, who is pictured here, who was designated as the second-in-command 0, meaning he was certified for flight instrument monitoring only, and the flight controls were solely to be manipulated by the captain, William Ramsey. At 3:04 p.m., November 452 Delta Alpha departed Philadelphia Airport on the 80 nautical mile flight. Despite being designated for flight instrument monitoring only, Second-in-Command Jeffrey Alino flew the entirety of the flight up until the last few seconds before the crash. Because of this, the flight path was very sporadic, and many times the captain had to instruct the second-in-command basic skills like altitude and heading keeping, which is shown in the sporadic flight path. After the initial route, the two were cleared the ILS runway 6 approach circle land runway 1. This meant that they would line up with the localizer for runway 6, fly the approach, and then at waypoint Torby, make a right-hand turn to line up for a final on runway 1. The white lines show the previous flight paths taken by aircraft who flew the same approach earlier that day. Despite being instructed to turn right at Torby, the second-in-command overflew Torby by a few miles until very close to runway 6. At this point, air traffic control asked their intentions, and the second-in-command responded, saying that they would begin their right turn. As they began their right turn, the second-in-command instructed the captain to take the flight controls. The captain did not respond, and in the right turn, they lost over 500 feet. The second-in-command then indicated again for the captain to take the flight controls, and the captain responded, saying, "My flight controls." After taking the flight controls, the captain began a steep left bank high pitch up to start turning for runway 1. As the second-in-command was watching the instruments, he said airspeed 4 times, indicating that the captain had the aircraft in a too high of a pitch attitude and the airspeed was dropping quickly and they were going to face an impending stall. The captain recognized the stall and said out loud, "Stall," to which the second-in-command agreed. The aircraft then began an even steeper bank up to 125 degrees, and they began barreling toward the ground. Several video cameras from around the crash site show exactly what happened as the aircraft impacted the ground. In the slowed down footage, you can see the steep bank and nose low pitch attitude that made the aircraft attitude unrecoverable. In this simulation of the crash, you can see that the airplane is set up for the ILS runway 6 coming in. You can see right here that the plane is much too close to the runway to begin its turn, but begins its turn anyways, and through the turn begins descending at around 500 feet. At this point, the captain takes over and begins turning to set up for runway 1. But because they're so low, he pitches up and begins this left bank, which leads to an aerodynamic stall, leading ultimately to the crash into the ground. In this picture on the left, you can see the point where the aircraft initially hit the building and where it eventually ended up on the ground to the bottom right. So ultimately, what led to the crash of 452 Delta Alpha? The first poor decision relates to crew resource management. While policy does not allow for the second-in-command 0 to have authority of the flight controls, the second-in-command flew the entirety of the flight up until the last few seconds. If the captain had been controlling the airplane throughout the route, there may have been a different outcome. Also playing into the crash was the lack of knowledge or neglect of FAA regulations and procedures. Several regulations were broken along this flight, including airspeed limitations and the neglect of ATC instructions. Ultimately, though, the cause of the crash was an aerodynamic stall. In this visual, you can see as the plane stalls, one wing becomes more stalled than the other, leading to a dip in the left wing and creating a much more harder to recover attitude. This is also classified as loss of control in flight. Loss of control in flight is the lead cause of accidents and fatalities in aviation, making up more than the next two categories put together. Learning more about stall awareness and knowledge of angle of attack is the best way to prevent a loss of control accident. So what can we take away from the crash of 452 Delta Alpha? Well, we can learn from the poor decisions of these pilots, and instead of saying, I would have made a better choice, educate ourselves to be better pilots in the future. This includes better knowledge of loss of control. Training through companies like Prevalence and other loss of control and unusual attitude trainers can give us a deeper understanding of unusual attitudes and make us safer pilots in the future.